Hello, my name is Spencer, and in my podcast called The Dictionary, I literally read from the dictionary, but add in my personal comments and stupid jokes to make it more interesting. Episodes are family-friendly, short, and air every single day on basically every podcast platform. Come join me on this journey filled with edutainment.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never written, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
My name is Daniel Kaka.
My name is Diet Coke.
We are joined today with someone who I've been a fan of in the podcasting scene for a while, Diet Coke. She has a ton of podcasts on a ton of different things, including a Godzilla podcast, which was called Go Go Godzilla, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And of course, her Godzilla fandom made me immediately think that we need to bring her on to talk about some Godzilla.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I want to know just about your kind of history with Godzilla. Like, when did you start becoming a fan, and kind of what does your fandom of Godzilla look like?
It's happened later in life, frankly. As a kid, I pretty much just knew Godzilla as like the real version of Reptar and the guy from the Malcolm in the Middle opening credits. But I thought Godzilla was very, very cool. But like as a kid in the 90s, in America, like they're not around. You can't find, like you can watch the Matthew Broderick one, but like pretty much none of the others were at like Blockbuster or anything like that. It was always a curiosity. And then 2014 came and there was a new American Godzilla. And I was like, hey, I have the internet now. What if I watched all of the Godzilla movies in like 3 weeks?
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
How many movies was that again?
At the time, it was 26.
Jeez.
There's been a few more since then.
What a magical time to be alive. And it's just like the internet is just like, I got 3 weeks before this movie comes out. Let's watch literally everything that exists.
And it was a glorious 3 weeks. Like, there are better Godzillas and worse Godzillas, but I can't think of a single one that I would say is truly bad.
Okay.
Maybe cheap, maybe silly, not traditionally good, but as long as you got a guy in a big lizard suit there, you're having a good time.
Yeah, everything is worth watching.
And then just from there, I just kind of went on a deep dive and became a Godzilla fan for life.
When you decided to watch Godzilla movies before the 2014, did it start with, oh, I'm going to watch the original Godzilla and then go from there? Or did you literally sit down and say, I'm going to watch all 26 films of this franchise that I've never thought about before?
The second part, I did that.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that is a...
That's just kind of how I am. Maybe Godzilla 2 through 15 are bad. But if I don't keep going, I'm not going to get to Godzilla 16, which could be good.
I think it was when Skyfall came out. I had only seen like one or two James Bond movies. So I was like, I'm going to try to watch all the James Bond movies in order. And I got through like 5 or 6 of them and didn't stick with it. I am impressed at your dedication.
I also did a similar thing with James Bond earlier in my life, where I watched all of them.
I was trying to get through all the James Bond movies during the pandemic. That did not pan out.
I mean, yeah, those early ones, they're going to be slow. They're going to be racist. They're going to
Very sexist.
Yep.
Yeah, very sexist.
I stopped around the time when 007 went to space.
Sure.
I was like, yep, they really jumped the shark and literally went to space because
Star Wars came out.
space movies. Yeah, Star Wars came out and they're like, space movies are cool. So yeah.
They had started on another James Bond movie and then just completely was like, stop, we need to go to space.
Yeah, well, we should go into a little bit about what we are actually talking about, because we have already recorded a part 1 to this episode where we were talking about the history of Godzilla as a franchise, how it changed and evolved in Japan, and how other countries, especially America, would do translations and re-edits in their countries. But what are we talking about today, Dan?
So specifically, we are going to be talking about, and I'm not going to attach the director to this. This is going to be mostly the writers because they're the ones who came up with it.
Okay.
But the Ted Elliott and the Terry Rossio script for Godzilla. This is going to be the one that was going to be made before Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin took over. But we're going to go through that one, and we're going to go into kind of the production history and the impact of the Roland Emmerich Godzilla as well, because I feel like that's also an important part of the story of this Japanese property coming to the US and how it's being interpreted. The reason why we got Godzilla to be produced in the US is because of producer and distributor Henry G. Saperstein, who had co-produced and distributed Godzilla films to American audiences. We mentioned him in the previous episode because he wanted to develop Godzilla versus Gargantua. I think he was also slightly involved in Godzilla versus the Devil as well because it was under the same company, but I don't know if he was directly involved with that one.
Okay, I have to ask real quick, Diet Coke, as somebody who has seen every single Godzilla film, this was news to me when we talked about it last time, and I just want to know, what's the deal with Godzilla versus the Devil?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember which monster they were translating as the devil. I don't know what rewrite that was. In none of the canonical Godzilla films does he fight the devil.
Oh, okay.
These weren't real movies. They were proposed movies.
Yeah.
Gargantuan and Devil. From Saperstein, he said, "For 10 years, I pressured Toho to make one in America, and finally they agreed." The idea came about when Saperstein had a meeting with producers Kerry Woods and Robert Enfried at Sony Studios discussing a live-action Mr. Magoo movie, which naturally leads to Godzilla.
Sure.
In October of 1992, TriStar, which is a subsidiary of Sony Pictures, announced that they had signed a deal with Toho to produce an American Godzilla film. We discussed this kind of in the first episode with the history of it, and I immediately have an issue with the US making a Godzilla movie because knowing the history of why the first Godzilla was made, it being H-bomb testing specifically from the US, for the US to have the audacity to be like, hey, this movie, which was a metaphor for atomic bombs in which the US had dropped on Japan, how dare you take that and make it in the US under US companies?
Yeah. To be fair, at a certain point, like, Godzilla was also the franchise where Godzilla has like human intelligence and is like a superhero who beats the evil monster and then bounces on his tail. So like, I can kind of see the idea of like Godzilla as just like a generic action franchise at that point, but like, I think it is firmly and importantly rooted in, I say this as a positive thing, anti-American ideology.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
At the very least, creatively, it's going to be at odds with that if you're an American company making it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I brought this up on the last episode. I always think about Bong Joon-ho's The Host, which is a great Korean monster movie that literally starts with American scientists doing some toxic waste or something in Korea that creates this monster. And it seems like a major theme of especially monster movies is how Americans are going to mess everything up.
Yeah. Yeah. At first, Columbia Pictures rejected the pitch. So from Woods, we pitched the idea to Columbia and they passed outright. Their response was felt with the potential for camp. From Freed, he was quoted saying, TriStar did originally pass on the project. The people who were running the studio at the particular time may not have seen the commercial potential there. May not have thought it would have been a great film.
You were saying that it was camp? They thought it was going to be too campy?
Yeah. Think about it. This is the early 90s.
Yeah.
And Diet Coke maybe can help me figure out, like, what is the perspective of Godzilla in the US at this time? Like, what would they be most exposed to as far as Godzilla goes?
I think Godzilla in the US, you'd see the really campy ones from the 70s on like, you'd see Sven Gulli introducing them or Elvira or whoever is hosting the like the cable movie marathons. And they were just kind of like these hokey, I think also like especially because American cinema was so about special effects and especially in the 90s, like CGI is a burgeoning field. I still encounter this when I talk to people about Godzilla. People see a franchise where it's a guy in a suit and they think that just looks cheap and tacky and fake.
Yeah.
I think there couldn't be more wrong, but that's definitely part of the public perception of Godzilla.
Yes.
Would this have been around the same time as stuff like Power Rangers?
Power Rangers was later on. So this is 1992.
Oh, okay.
This is on the cusp of Jurassic Park just about to come out.
Okay. I just also think about what other stuff was being imported in from Japanese entertainment and how cheesy or corny were we looking at that stuff and just assuming like, we can't make a monster movie from Japan that doesn't look like a big cheese fest.
Yeah.
I mean, not specifically Japan, but the idea of Asian media, a lot of it was kung fu and martial arts films, and our interpretation and adaptation of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. So the producer, Woods, with the advice from his wife, went over everyone's heads and pitched the idea to CEO of Sony Pictures, Peter Guber, who immediately loved the idea. His reasoning behind this is that Godzilla is an international brand, and who wouldn't want to see a fire-breathing monster on the silver screen? TriStar Vice President Ken Lemberger was sent to Tokyo to make a deal with Toho Studios in mid-1992. The initial offer was up to $400,000 payment in advance with an annual licensing fee for the Godzilla character and some of the other monster characters from previous Godzilla films. And this would help avoid what Marvel ran into during their run, where they only got Godzilla and they're just like, well, we have a bunch of superheroes that can fight him, I guess.
Are you aware of the Marvel Godzilla comics?
I am aware. I've read one issue. It was the only issue that I was able to track down online. But it's a trip.
So Toho, they would also get production bonuses, distribution, merchandising for Japan, along with a percentage of the profits from the international ticket sales and merchandise. Toho was still allowed to make their own Godzilla movie while TriStar made their movies simultaneously. So that's why we got, what was the movie that came out in 1993? Do you remember?
Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 came out in 93.
That's what it was, yeah. That's why Toho was still able to make Godzilla while TriStar and Sony was able to go ahead with this project. Toho agreed to the deal, but they did send Sony a list of rules on how to treat Godzilla.
Oh.
Freed stated, quote, "They even sent me a 4-page, single-spaced memo describing the physical requirements the Godzilla in our film had to have." They were very protective.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that we talked about a lot that kind of surprised me in the last episode, is that for the reputation that the Godzilla franchise has as being like really cheesy and goofy, the people behind it are very specific and protective of wanting to make sure everything is portrayed in a certain way.
Yeah. The moral of the story, I think, is going to come down to like always follow the rules. Always.
Yeah.
By October 1992, it was official. Godzilla was going to be produced entirely in the US. TriStar not only announced that they were making a Godzilla movie, but they were planning on making a trilogy. Surprisingly, there was a lot of support from former crew members from previous Godzilla movies. Even Ishiro Honda stated, quote, "It'll probably be much more interesting than the ones currently being produced in Japan."
I think that's him being an old man at that point and being a hater and being like, current movies, they suck. Can't be worse than that.
Because this is the second era that they're going through, I believe.
We might be into the third at this one. It's the tail end of the second, but it's the second.
It seems like with all the Godzilla movies, the first ones are always trying to go back to the original and trying to capture that type of mood and that type of morality. And then as the franchise continues, they realize, you know, it's just little boys coming to theaters who want to see a monster versus another monster.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to deliver. And I think Honda was seeing the same thing, where it's like the movies will start to devolve into monster versus monster. And for his mentality behind Godzilla, he sees it as they're straying away from what the original idea was. And if the US is able to restart this franchise brand new, they might go back to the original morals that he was trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
In 1993, Terry Rossio and Ted Elliott were hired to write the first draft, which at first they turned down. Actually, they turned it down multiple times. At the time, they were known for writing Little Monsters and Aladdin, but they would go on to write The Mask of Zorro, Small Soldiers, The Road to El Dorado, Shrek, Treasure Planet, Pirates of the Caribbean, National Treasure, and many more movies.
Wow.
It's a star-studded filmography.
On one hand, I'm a little surprised that all of those are written by the same people, because there's a lot of big hits in there. But then again, like, it does make sense that there is a similar thread of sense of humor from El Dorado to Shrek to Pirates of the Caribbean to National Treasure. I could definitely see that through line now.
I think that you can kind of see the through line in that they're all like, they work because they're just well executed by the number of scripts, all of those. Like, that's my impression of all of those movies. It's like,
yeah,
if you've got enough charm, form to insert into it. You can just write all those by the numbers from a handbook.
Yeah, it's by the numbers plot-wise. I think there's enough uniqueness in a lot of the characters in a lot of those stories. One of the reasons why Pirates of the Caribbean works, for example, is like it's a by-the-numbers plot, but with memorable and unique characters. And I think the same could be said for something like Shrek. It feels like that's where a lot of their strength comes in.
Mm-hmm. So in a coincidental twist, Terry Rossio, he would actually go on to develop the story for the 2021 movie Godzilla vs. Kong.
Interesting.
They seemed to be unsure as to how to approach the film at first. It was Woods that would eventually convince them to discuss the film with TriStar. The pair wrote a 3.5-page treatment and they were hired. Freed thought that they were a good fit because, to him, they were, quote, talented sci-fi buffs. And I couldn't really see anything that backed that up. Keep in mind, the only two movies, or at least big movies that they wrote before this, was Little Monsters and Aladdin. So I'm not really seeing sci-fi as it is maybe just kind of diving into the bizarre for a little bit.
I mean, it might not be necessarily in their work, but it certainly could be just the things that they talk about at every meeting that they take.
Yeah.
Maybe they talk to them like, these nerds know sci-fi.
For Elliott and Rossio, they were extremely grateful for the guide that Toho provided them, which helped them figure out the tone of the film, especially with its social and political implications. The way they understood Godzilla is that he's not only just a good guy fighting for humanity, but a territorial beast. They tried to be faithful to the Godzilla franchise, but the thing is that Toho wasn't too consistent with Godzilla throughout their own franchise either. So Elliott and Rossio tried to narrow it down to the first 3 movies. Elliott stated, in one movie, it does what the first 3 Toho movies did. It takes him from being a horrendous threat to being a defender of the Earth. They also took elements from Moby Dick in the Ahab character, applying it to the widow who lost her husband to Godzilla. And on November 10th, 1993, they submitted the first draft, and producers were happy with the results.
That's interesting because in 2014, Godzilla, Bryan Cranston is a widower who lost a spouse to, not Godzilla, to the Mutos, I guess, but
yeah,
kind of see that element showing up again in a later American Godzilla.
Yeah, I actually watched it yesterday, and I was kind of surprised by how many elements kind of taken from this script, and even not just the first Godzilla, but the Godzilla King of the Monsters. Oh, wait, no, I might be thinking too far ahead. In Godzilla King of the Monsters, the new one.
The new one, not, yeah.
It starts off with an aftermath of the destruction. And the very first Godzilla King of the Monsters, the American version of Godzilla, they also started the same way. And I thought that was interesting in how they paralleled that. But yeah, Bryan Cranston is the widower, even if he's in the movie for maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah. He does get an Ahab-like obsession, though. He does. That's what he does with those 10 minutes.
Yeah. So in 1994, TriStar hired Jan de Bont to direct, who primarily was a cinematographer, but just came off of directing his first blockbuster hit, Speed. Mm-hmm. The hope was to have this film ready to be released in the summer of 1996. The first thing he changed was Godzilla's atomic origin, and instead was a dormant beast that would be awakened when it's needed. Instead of choosing from one of the many iconic monsters created in previous films, he proposed an all-new monster, a shape-shifting alien kaiju called the Griffin.
Love this.
To do the effects, they hired Stan Winston, who, previous to this, did effects for The Terminator, Aliens, Predator, and even Jurassic Park. He also sculpted, and I got to find out where these are, but he sculpted what their version of Godzilla would be and the new creature Griffin.
I'm looking at his Stan Winston's version of Godzilla right now. It's beautiful. It's so much better than the finished product.
From what I remember, it's a very muscular Godzilla.
Yeah, but muscular in a way that's not like
a 90s action figure.
Yeah, Godzilla's not a human being. I don't mean to spoil anything about the franchise. He's got a weird, almost that kind of pigeon chest kind of muscle, where it's not pretty, but it just looks like it could crush you.
Yeah.
Do we know how they were planning on doing the effects? Were they planning on doing it CG, stop motion? Were they going to try to do man in a suit like classic Godzilla?
It looked like they were going to do CG for the most part. This is coming off of Jurassic Park, and they figure, if you can do that with a computer, like, we should be able to make Godzilla in a computer.
Yeah. Never mind the fact that it was a combination of CG and animatronics in Jurassic Park.
And I think they were going to do that. And even in and we'll dive into this more, but the Roland Emmerich Godzilla, they also blend CG and animatronic as well, although the CG seems to be heavily favored.
Yeah, that is news to me. It does not look like they've blended the two.
So what we're going to go over next is we're going to go over a synopsis of the draft written by Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, which was submitted December 9th, 1994.
Okay.
Now, you can read the script online. That is pretty easy to find, but what I would recommend is the unofficial digital graphic novel, which was written and illustrated by Ted Tennant and Eldon Ardient, which is titled Godzilla 94. Tennant was running a website called Kaiju File, where he was drawing different kaijus that he was a fan of. He discovered the Elliott and Rossio script and started illustrating the script. After putting out the first 78 pages, Terry Rossio contacted him via email and actually commissioned him to finish the rest of the graphic novel, and it was completed in November 2018. So let's go through this. We open on a dark sky, pan down to a glacial cliff, and continue to an overhead view of the Arctic Ocean. An iceberg begins to surface, and carved into the ice is the word Godzilla.
Who carved it into the ice?
Love this. Godzilla!
It's Godzilla, obviously. That's the signature.
He was doing the thing, you know, when someone might pee in the snow and try to spell their name. That's just what Godzilla was doing.
It's probably just supposed to be like an Our Flag Means Death style title in the reality of the story.
Mm-hmm. It's 1993. A group of eco-warriors are on an old fishing boat, the Rainbow Warrior. They float outside of a small natural harbor. The team notices an unusual high amount of radiation. Beneath the boat, the Arctic waters begin to boil. Suddenly, the harbor explodes. The snow begins to burn. The surface of the glacier begins to crack open as if something was emerging from below. A red-black fluid flows out of the fissure and into the sea. One of the eco-warriors states that the earth is bleeding.
So it's Godzilla, the last airbender.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
That's classic. That moment of people in the ocean and see some ice start to shake and Godzilla pops out. That's like 5 different Godzilla movies that open that way.
Huh.
Specifically from the ice, too?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
In an early Godzilla, he gets buried in the ice, and because different movies honor different continuities, anyone that picks up after that is going to start with him bursting out of the ice.
Oh, that's why.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And they continue to do that after this, too, because Final Wars, which came out in 24, also has that opening.
Huh. So yeah, interior Llewellyn House. Jill and Keith are interrupted in the middle of the night with a call from the government. They are needed in the Arctic. A helicopter lands in their front lawn and escorts them to the Arctic outpost, leaving their 15-year-old daughter, Tina, behind. At the Arctic outpost, Keith is led into the fissure, where the red atomic fluid is leaking from. Jill goes into the lab. They ascend into the womb cavern. Inside, they find a kaiju 247 feet long and seems to be frozen in time. They assume it's some sort of dinosaur, but they can't specify the species. Suddenly, the cavern rumbles and the lights go out. The kaiju wakes up, destroying everything, spewing its atomic breath, accompanied by the iconic Skreonk.
Love it.
Jill, who is in the lab, narrowly survives the destruction as the kaiju escapes. Keith is killed in this part where the kaiju comes alive. Tiki Islands, northeast of Japan. Currently, a hurricane is going on. An old fisherman, Junji, goes to the dock to save his boat and is suddenly face to face with a menacing kaiju. Junji narrowly misses the destructive footstep of the beast as it breaches the shore. Quote from Junji, "It cannot be. Gojira." Gojira wreaks havoc through the fishing village, eating a claw full of fish and a tree, because it's important to eat your salads, kids.
Yeah, gotta get your veggies.
Yeah. Gojira pauses and looks up at the sky like it's searching for something. Skreonks and atomic breath beam into the sky and dives into the ocean. 1 year later, we are at the Moriagi Care Institute. Aaron Vaught and Marty Kinoshita sneak into the institute to question Junji. Junji reveals drawings he's hung onto and says that he has stories from his grandfather about Gojira. Junji is suddenly arrested and taken away, all while he claims that he's not crazy and that Gojira is real. Eren seems to be the only one that believes this hysterical man. In Traveler, Utah, a meteor hits Lake Apopka, blasting fish and waterbound creatures into the air and litters the town like a biblical plague. At the Arctic outpost, a large, bubbly dome surfaces from beneath the ice. On an airplane are Eren and Marty and Special Agent Pike, a man who led the arrest of Junji. Pike shows them 2 pictures of Gojira and offers them a job. Eren and Marty are taken to Fort Tuscarora, the Massachusetts headquarters where the St. George Project is taking place, an operation dedicated to finding the kaiju and containing it. Jill is there questioning Admiral Timothy Benedict, deciding to bring on Eren Vaught, just because he wrote a fictional book about Gojira, with most of the facts being true. Jill simply wants to kill the creature because it killed her husband in the first act. Jill is called away to deal with her recently arrested rebellious daughter. She's been wanting to get out of Fort Tuscarora because nothing is there for her. They argue, Tina gets out of the car, Jill's beeper goes off, and she needs to head back to the headquarters. At Lake Apopka, we follow an alien probe, that was the meteor that falls into the lake, which looks like a giant metal sphere, traveling through the water and into a bat cave. Multiple bats are flying around the mysterious sphere as it shoots its silver cables out in every direction and captures the bats. Outside of the cave, mutated bats, also known as probe bats, with 12-foot wingspan, they spew out of the mouth of the cave and they begin to hunt. These bats, they're being hit by the silver cables. This alien probe is mutating these bats for them to go out. They're like the henchmen of this alien probe.
Are aliens a thing in Godzilla?
Oh, for sure. Aliens have been around in Godzilla since the 60s. Not this specific thing, but the idea of aliens somehow using alien technology to create monsters under their command or to just control the existing kaiju that exists on Earth. You see that throughout the Godzilla movies when the aliens show up.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in the previous episode. It was only one sentence where I said there were these aliens known as Zalians.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Zillion. They're from Planet X. I mean, that's how it's translated in English. I don't know what they call them in Japanese.
Yeah.
In the subtitles and in the dubs, they're Zillions because they're from Planet X.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and they come down, they control the minds of the kaijus. So Jill and Eren are flown to the Arctic post to inspect the mysterious dome and the cavern. Eren explains that mythical beasts will often have an adversary that they will need to fight. This is also the first time Eren reveals the name of the beast is Godzilla. He also concludes that they may have discovered Godzilla too early, and they were supposed to find this green bubbly dome first, since it would provide them with information about Godzilla. As they explore, a microscopic being enters into Marty's eyeball. So they have this protective gear, but there's this moment where he lifts up his face mask and there's this little microscopic
midichlorian. Yeah. Midichlorian gets him.
Yeah, and just shoots itself into his eye. Back in Utah, wildlife is getting slaughtered by the hungry mutant bats. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a few fishing vessels are attacked by Godzilla. Not really attacked, but they get in the wake of Godzilla and they get toppled over and their fishing nets get caught in basically his way.
Another familiar scene in Godzilla movies.
Yeah.
Back at the Arctic facility, it's revealed that Marty has mutated and is possibly the Thing.
Love this.
He's transported away to seek better help. It's been reported that Godzilla has been spotted in San Francisco. Jill and Eren are sent to Fort Point Command Center in San Francisco, where they watch Benedict lead a convoy of battleships and choppers to hit the beast with everything they've got.
Is there anything like humans mutating that, from alien stuff that has anything to do with what's come previously in Godzilla?
I'm trying to think of previously, because I know that's definitely a thing in the 2004 Final Wars Godzilla.
Okay.
It sounds like I'm bringing up that one a lot. It's because that was the one that was supposed to be Toho's last film, and they threw every Godzilla trope into it.
Oh, okay.
So
awesome.
if it showed up in any movie, it also showed up in Final Wars.
Yeah.
I'm probably forgetting a moment where it happened in an earlier one because it was in Final Wars. And there's definitely there's aliens, there's mutants, there's people with psychic connection to the kaiju, and then it kind of goes both ways sometimes. There's kind of a mishmash of all these ideas coming out in various forms.
Okay,
All right.
cool.
At first, Godzilla sinks into the ocean after the initial hit. The soldiers assume it's dead until it surfaces and seeks vengeance, destroying any vehicle that gets close to it and uses its atomic breath to take care of the rest. Pike radically suggests that they should just nuke the beast, which Benedict is adamantly against.
Foolish business. That's how you make Godzilla more powerful. He loves radiation.
Yeah,
That's what he eats. It's literally his food.
They discover that Godzilla is radioactive, and the red fluid that was leaking from the womb was some kind of neutralizing agent to suppress its abilities. Using ships and choppers, they spray the red fluid all throughout the San Francisco Bay. As an extra layer of protection, they place depth charges that will go off if the creature is near the coast. The charges go off, causing Godzilla to surface. Nothing seems to be stopping Godzilla, not the tanks nor the fighter jets. Godzilla charges up, its dorsal fins now glowing, spewing its atomic breath on anything that gets in its way. Godzilla is now on land, terrorizing downtown San Francisco.
I'm looking at the graphic novel as we're going through this, and we got a moment of him biting at the Golden Gate Bridge, which seems like a classic place for action movies to have some sort of action on. And it makes perfect sense for Godzilla to be taking that down in an American remake.
Yeah. I also found it interesting with the American Godzillas that are coming out now. San Francisco is a target of Godzilla in those future films. So I thought it was interesting that they brought that element from this movie and put it into the new films.
I would have to imagine it's because we know Godzilla lives in the Pacific, and if he's going to strike mainland U.S., I think San Francisco is just a more visually interesting city to attack than L.A.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Golden Gate Bridge is the most iconic American thing on the Pacific Ocean. So it makes perfect sense that they would want to use that.
I wouldn't mind seeing Godzilla destroy the Hollywood sign, though. That'd be cool.
There's just so much traffic he's got to fight through in order to get there.
That's true. Godzilla also hates the 405.
I'm also now just trying to imagine other like Pacific cities he can go to. Like, is he going to just start tearing down that deer Portland sign, the Portland sign with the deer on it?
He could attack San Diego like while there's a big kaiju fan convention at the convention center.
There you go. Oh, that would be great.
What baffles me is that kaijus are naturally driven to go into heavily populated cities, which breaks my brain because I think of that as like someone going into a house and choosing to walk through the room with broken glass.
Well, he does literally feeds off radiation. That is his sustenance. So I'd have to imagine that there's more of that in a big city.
He's just inclined to that. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. A signal from the Arctic Dome is sent to a tower in San Francisco via satellite. Godzilla feels the transmission and destroys the building transmitting it with its atomic breath. So they send the signal to a helicopter, which Aaron is inside of. Godzilla chases the chopper, leading it away from the city. Just before Godzilla can dive into the ocean near the Golden Gate Bridge, it's struck with multiple missiles and disappears underwater. Aaron lands and makes his way onto the bridge. After Godzilla emerges, it's hit with the red fluid. Godzilla struggles to fight back, climbs onto the bridge, and collapses. Aaron stays on the bridge, standing before the fallen kaiju, which is a scene that we see in the Roland Emmerich Godzilla, but do we ever see Godzilla ever collapse on a bridge in any of the Japanese films?
I'm trying to think of specifically on a bridge. The thing that reminds me of, honestly, is like standing over the collapsed monster feels more like they're pulling an image from King Kong than Godzilla. But like also the early Godzilla movies, because King Kong were the biggest giant monster movies that had existed before that, like early Godzilla's definitely pull from King Kong a lot and kind of use some of that imagery. I think that might just be like a classic monster movie image going back to the 30s.
All right.
Yeah.
Back in Utah, the mutant bats terrorize churchgoers. We follow the bats back to the cave where they seem to be carrying back humans and animals into the cocoon, feeding it. Back in San Francisco, Jill is arguing with Pike and Benedict that the beast needs to be killed. Under presidential orders, they need to keep the creature alive, and Godzilla is airlifted across the country to the Clay County area, which I believe is in Massachusetts.
That is a long trip to be carrying
It is a
Godzilla
very
on
long trip. Yeah.
airplanes.
Well, in the first Godzilla versus King Kong, they carry King Kong on a bunch of balloons all the way across Japan. So, if they could do that, if actual planes, you can get much further, I bet.
Yeah. At the Fort Tuscarora Base Hospital, Aaron visits Marty to see that he's completely mutated. Marty says that he dreams about Godzilla and brings up the possibility of the adversary that Godzilla will need to fight. At Fort Tuscarora, Godzilla is being held in a holding tank building. There's a slight visual joke because they only knew the creature's height, but they did not take into account his tail. So his tail is actually splayed out in the open outside of the facility.
Oh.
That's cute. I like that.
Inside, they are experimenting on the body, sending electricity through its body to see what would happen. Aaron has hijacked Jill's team to learn more about where Godzilla may have been going, proposing that there has to be an adversary because when he came to shore, it seemed to be heading in a straight line, like it was headed to a specific location. Using that line, they were scanning across the US for any unusual activity until they stumbled upon Traveler, Utah.
So this is in the 2014 movie too. That is the whole thing with Godzilla and the Mutos in the 2014 movie. Godzilla shows up to defeat them, and they track Godzilla's location by realizing that he is headed in a straight line towards the Mutos.
Huh. That's from this script and not from anything else, right?
Not to my knowledge. The specific tracking him like that, I would say, is from this script. The idea of Godzilla as this kind of ancient deity who shows up to defeat an adversary shows up occasionally in the Japanese movies.
Huh.
I think when he first fought Ghidorah was when that first came up.
Mm-hmm. Jill's daughter, Tina, enters the building and is upset to find out that her mother's whole mission was to kill Godzilla, which I guess was something that she never knew. Tina states that when her father died, she not only lost dad, but her mother too. Aaron enters a diner in Traveler, Utah. He talks to the sheriff and gets some answers and gets an earful of strange going-ons in the town. He asks if there's a lake nearby, and the sheriff mentions Lake Apopka. Aaron and the character Fleer take off to the lake ASAP. Jill and Benedict visit Marty in the hospital. Marty appears to be in his final form as some sort of tentacle monster.
The way it's designed in the comic does feel a lot like an H.R. Giger alien monster.
Yeah. Marty warns of an alien species that invades planets, uses the organic material around them to create a doomsday beast. Jill asks if it's Godzilla, but Marty explains that it's not. It's Griffin, and it's already here. Jill is insistent on how to kill Godzilla, but Marty, in a very weak tone, says that Godzilla will kill it, and Godzilla cannot be killed. Soon after, Marty dies. At the lake, Fleer takes Aaron scuba diving to inspect the cave. They find carcasses of dead animals that seem to be chemically disintegrating. That's when they discover the beast, Griffin. Just like Junji's illustrations, suddenly it comes to life, giving a mighty roar, revealing its 3-snake tongue. Aaron and Fleer narrowly escape as the kaiju bursts out of the cave. The beast stands on all 4 limbs, his dragon wings, the tail of an ankylosaurus, a center horn with 2 goat-like horns next to it, lizard skin, and large claws. Basically, it's a griffin kaiju. Back at Fort Tuscarora, Godzilla is awoken and bursts out of the holding tank building, entrapping it. The military tries its best to subdue him, but it's no use. Godzilla is out and seeking a fight. At the lake, we see Griffin take off, flying and using a laser beam created from its wings, destroying everything in front of it. Aaron and Fleer jump into the Jeep and chase the beast. The Jeep somehow gets ahead of Griffin, with Aaron and Fleer inside. The Jeep passes under an overpass, emerges out the other side, and is blasted with a beam. Aaron and Fleer manage to jump out of the vehicle before it gets destroyed. Griffin continues its rampage and leaves the town. I don't know why the Jeep had to be destroyed. I thought that was really weird. I think it's just
you just gotta
more action for action's sake. But sure.
Been too long without something.
Have a moment
up.
of peril.
Yeah. One day later, Aaron and Fleer meet up with the sheriff so they can take the truck to the airport, where Jet will take them to the St. George project. Fleer hesitantly joins. At the project, they are informed of another creature. Collectively, they calculate the 2 creatures will meet in Manhattan. Jill needs to warn Tina about the kaijus because for some reason that's not explained, she's in New York City.
Why are the kaijus going to New York?
It's the Big Apple. It's the center of the world, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's not like it's halfway between Massachusetts and Utah.
If they can make it there, they can make it anyway.
Yeah.
Prove themselves. Yeah, it didn't occur to me at first because I forget that this creature is kind of griffin-like, but there is a griffin-esque creature in original Godzilla
Yes, there is.
called King Caesar. Real freaky-looking guy.
Yeah. That's the Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, the first one?
Yeah, believe that's where he first shows up.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It looks like rabbit ears.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a Japanese mythical beast that I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. There's accent marks that I don't know what they mean.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be like a combination of a dog and a lion.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, and it can shoot laser beams out of its forehead eye.
You better believe it, Cam.
Yeah. Jill is escorted via helicopter to try and evacuate her daughter. The pilot drops off Jill and tells her she's on her own. Aaron, Fleer, and Benedict are at the temporary command post near the shore of New York City. Griffin sends a beam into the streets of Manhattan, causing destruction similar to the UFOs in Independence Day. The Griffin then lands on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, destroying the statue entirely.
That's why they go to New York.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because they got a producer's note that they need some landmarks to be destroyed.
Godzilla emerges from the Hudson River and, as tradition, takes out a train. As a fun throwaway scene, a few looters stealing guns spot Godzilla. They shoot it and get crushed under its foot.
Why is everybody always trying to shoot Godzilla with a gun? How do you not know that's not going to work?
I think that scene kind of happens in the Roland Emmerich Godzilla as well. There's like looters. They're not stealing guns, but they're like taking electronics or something.
Let's go before we get caught!
Jimmy, you know that bad feeling I get when something really bad is gonna happen?
Yeah.
I'm getting that feeling right now, man.
But they don't get crushed by him. So it's not giving away the morality that if you steal, you will get crushed by a kaiju. So the two beasts, the two kaijus, spot each other and give out an intimidating roar. Griffin flies toward Godzilla, picks it up, and smashes it into a building. Godzilla bites Griffin's foot, and Griffin retaliates by shooting a beam into Godzilla's chest. Godzilla grabs Griffin's tail, and it flies away and then slams it into the ground. Jill manages to find Tina outside of her apartment and is now looking for a way out of the city. The battle continues with a standoff that centers around the World Trade Center buildings. Godzilla utilizes the reflection on the building to confuse Griffin, who ends up lunging at Godzilla's reflection, giving Godzilla the upper hand to attack while the towers are destroyed.
Woof.
Yeah. So here's the thing, is that if you're following along in the graphic novel, you will not see this at all, because the graphic novels were made post 9/11. This script was done pre 9/11.
I was about to ask that because looking at the graphic novel, it's like every panel of this has the World Trade Centers in the background. And it almost like you're just waiting to see when they crash into those enormous landmarks. But
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of movies that have like unfortunate ironic shots of the Twin Towers now.
yeah.
I'm trying to think of movies where they're actually destroyed in past movies. And I can think of exactly one that did come out around this time. As much as I would like to believe this, I highly doubt they were taking inspiration from the live-action Super Mario Brothers movie, which also destroyed the Twin Towers.
And I think we discussed this before. There is another unmade movie that we covered that also destroys the Twin Towers, and that was James Cameron's Spider-Man.
Oh,
Yep,
interesting.
They have a battle between the buildings. I don't think it like knocks it out entirely, but it definitely like causes some damage to those buildings.
Like they didn't damage them in the final movie, but they shot a sequence of the Twin Towers in the final movie because it was in that first trailer.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if that was something that was for the movie or one of those like things they shot specifically for a trailer, because it had that kind of like self-contained story vibe to it. But
So Griffin is way too powerful and knocks down Godzilla, nearly defeating it. Aaron realizes that Godzilla can't use his fire. So all throughout the script, they actually refer to his atomic breath as his fire for some reason. But I've been calling it atomic breath because that's what it's known as.
I think that's also part of like Americans not really understanding Godzilla, it just being this weird thing they see on late at 2 a.m. on cable. They're like, yeah, it breathes fire. It's hot, comes out of him, that's fire.
Yeah. What they need to do is they need to remove the restraining device so that he can finally use his atomic breath. Which is probably a little late to mention this. He tells everyone that Godzilla is a protector and he's not a threat to humanity. This is Aaron saying this.
Common theme in Godzilla. There's always like a specific... Wait, who's Aaron again? Is that a kid?
He is the writer who wrote a nonfiction book about Godzilla.
Right. Okay, so not a kid. It's usually a kid, but there's often someone saying, hey, Godzilla is nice, actually.
Yeah. The plan is to take a helicopter, fly it up to Godzilla, and somehow plant C4 to destroy the restraint.
Sure.
Yeah. Jill manages to call Benedict to request an evac. The request is denied, but she is now aware of the C4 plan. She and Tina run towards Godzilla. A transport helicopter flies towards the battle, accompanied by 2 Apache choppers to provide cover. The transport chopper hovers over the hunched-over Godzilla while the Apaches fire at Griffin, distracting it. Fleer and Aaron rappel down to the fallen beast. As they plant the C4, one of the Apaches is destroyed and the other one uses the Empire State Building as a shield as Griffin tries to hit it with its laser beam. At the same time, the Apache fires rounds through the building to hit Griffin. The top of the Empire State Building topples over and onto Griffin, knocking it out. Pike, who is in the Apache, is certain Griffin is dead and heads to Godzilla with the motive to kill it. Aaron and Fleer find cover behind Godzilla's dorsal fins as shots are being fired in their direction. Jill and Tina, who are now at the scene, are confused by what's going on. Griffin wakes up and is able to smack the attacking Apache. Pike fires a missile at Godzilla but misses, causing the missile to hit a nearby building, something that we see very frequently in the Roland Emmerich Godzilla. The debris lands on the transport helicopter, causing it to smash into the building. Fleer falls off Godzilla and Aaron manages to catch him. Griffin successfully knocks Pike's Apache out of the air, destroying it. Griffin refocuses on Godzilla, but because its wingspan keeps getting caught between buildings, which I guess is a problem now, it can't get to Godzilla right away. It finds a road wide enough so it can charge Godzilla.
Why doesn't it just fly higher?
I don't know. Yeah, which is why I brought this up. I was like, it didn't seem like a concern before, but now I guess it is a concern now. I don't know why. Jill and Tina are right in the middle of the 2 beasts. Jill breaks into a truck hoping to drive off, but there are no keys. But she spots and grabs some road flares. Aaron and Fleer keep working on setting up the C4. Jill has Tina hotwire the truck and drives off. I didn't mention this before because I didn't think this was important, but when Tina was arrested the first time, she was arrested for hotwiring a car. So this is their payoff moment for that.
So it's wrong to steal unless it's a car.
Yes.
Following the morality of the movie.
The PSA that aired before this movie is, you wouldn't steal a car, would you? ... You should, though, because you should.
Yes, you should. Jill stays behind while Tina drives the truck. Aaron can only detonate the bomb set for 30 seconds. The remote is broken. Griffin is headed their way. Jill lights a flare, confusing Griffin, buying them more time. Tina floors the accelerator, the truck pointed at the confused beast. She tucks and rolls out of the car, hoping that it'll hit the monster, but ends up going between its legs unscathed. Regardless, it's confused the beast even more. The beast looks at Jill and Tina, attempts to swipe at them, but barely misses. As Jill and Tina are still being hunted, the truck hits a gas main and explodes, catching Griffin on fire as Jill and Tina escape. The charge is set and Aaron rappels down with Fleer on his back. They get to about 20 feet off the ground when the harness gets tangled. The charge explodes and Aaron and Fleer fall and survive the landing. The large restraining device falls towards them and they dodge the object before it obliterates them. I do need to mention that there are some moments in the graphic novel where they veer away from the script because a lot of the focus towards the third act of this movie should be the fight between Griffin and Godzilla. And the thing is that there were so many cutaways to Aaron and Fleer or even Jill and Tina that the graphic novel seems to be cutting them out, but I'm leaving it in for the synopsis.
Graphic novel just wanted to see more monster fights.
Exactly, yeah. So that's why you're not seeing some of these scenes that I mentioned in here. Godzilla is back. The still on fire Griffin dive bombs towards Godzilla, and Godzilla hits it with an atomic breath, sending it into the East River. Jill, Tina, Aaron, and Fleer all meet on the ground. In the street, Pike managed to survive the crash and climbs out of the Apache. Pike meets up with everyone else, who they are very angry with him. In the graphic novel, he gets punched in the face. In the script, it does not mention that at all. They're just like, we don't like you anymore. Griffin crash lands near them. They all run into the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. Griffin spots them and hunts them down. Pike empties his machine gun into the beast, but it's no use. All of them manage to escape except Pike, who is eaten by one of the 3 snake tongues.
Sure.
Griffin spots the leaking restraining device tank and grabs it with its claws before it takes off. Godzilla dives into the water. Just before Griffin is able to attack with the restraining device, Godzilla atomic breaths the water, causing steam to rise up and blind Griffin. Godzilla dives out of the way, causing Griffin to hit the Brooklyn Bridge. Godzilla tail whips the device away from Griffin, both of them getting tangled in the cables. Griffin electrocutes the metal cables and Godzilla, giving it time to escape and hit Godzilla. In the tunnel, the fight causes the walls to crack and water pours in. The team needs to get out now. Godzilla manages to bite a chunk out of Griffin's wing. Godzilla's foot creates a large hole in the tunnel, and now a wall of water is headed for the team. They all get into a red Subaru that buys them time to escape.
Does it say Subaru in the script?
It does. It said a red Subaru, and I thought to include it.
Oh, kickback there, huh?
They're submerged in water. They open the windows to equalize the pressure and swim out of the vehicle. Aaron gets pinned between the steering wheel and a seat, telling everyone else to go on without him. The rest of them run into, ironically, a water bottle truck that's blocking them from escaping. This might be the end. Tina, Fleer, and Jill use the large, empty water bottles to rise to the surface. This is more like those office watering jugs.
Yeah.
So the big ones, not just like little water bottles. Jill dives back down to save Aaron at the last second. They all surface, now using the large water bottles as a source of air to breathe when needed. They swim/walk towards the light at the end of the tunnel and emerge to see Godzilla fighting Griffin. Again, this is another one of those scenes that if you're following along in the graphic novel, it is not in there. Again, the graphic novel is solely focused on the fight between Godzilla and Griffin because that's the only thing that's really interesting. Godzilla tries to drown Griffin, but it gets away. Godzilla begins to charge up and his dorsal fins start to glow and grow. Griffin dive bombs, but this time he is met with Godzilla's jagged fins. Quote from the script, "The Griffin is ripped open from stem to stern."
That's cool. I like that.
Godzilla pulls Griffin apart from the chest and pulls its head off.
Oh my gosh. I'm looking at the panel of that in the graphic novel right now, and it's like he's literally tearing him in half.
He throws it into the air and atomic breaths it until it disintegrates. Godzilla lowers itself into the water and swims into the ocean. Jill now sees that Godzilla is here to defend Earth from outside threats like alien kaijus, and has Benedict call off the attack on Godzilla, but it's too late. Too many missiles have been fired at the beast, causing it to collapse and sink deeper into the ocean. They take a chopper to where Godzilla was struck down, thinking it's gone. Suddenly, Fleer spots a V-shaped wake. The camera drops below sea level. Godzilla is nowhere to be found. We hear the booming heartbeats of Godzilla, and as the screen fades to black, we hear the iconic Godzilla screonk. The end. Roll credits. Cue Come With Me by Puff Daddy featuring Jimmy Page.
That was literally in the script?
No.
Oh, okay.
The Puff Daddy song was not included for this one.
Thought that was like a Zach Braff with the Garden State script.
Yeah.
Jan Devon actually passed around the Godzilla soundtrack to different producers.
Wow. He goes back into the Atlantic Ocean, but his home is the other side of the planet, right? Is he going to have to like climb across the U.S. again?
His home is in the Arctic, so he just needs to go south.
I guess that makes sense.
I mean, historically that has not been the lore, but
No.
I guess this movie does leave it open that could be the lore.
Yeah.
Or I guess the film states explicitly, right? Because he's in that weird womb thing at the start.
Yeah. So DeBont, he made a few changes to the first draft. Some of those changes we actually did here in the synopsis. The first one being that there was a 12-year gap between the attack in Japan and then the rediscovery, or at least the meteor or the alien probe coming to Earth. He reduced that down to 1 year. Jill originally did not go with Keith to the Arctic site, but in the new draft, Jill goes with him. The alien, it crashes in Traveler, Utah. In the first draft, it was originally Kentucky. So yeah, why this movie didn't get made. It ran into the very similar issue that we run into for most of the films that we cover. The budget was just way too high.
Yeah.
It was estimated that this movie was going to cost anywhere from $120 million. In the later revised version, it was probably going to be around $200 million for it to be made. When TriStar refused to put up the cash, DeBont left the project and moved on to make his other hits, Twister and Speed 2, Cruise Control.
Which is a great movie. Let me get this out there. I'm a Speed 2 defender.
Elliott and Rossio stayed on and revised the script with DeBont's suggestions, which is the story that we just went over. The final draft that was submitted was in spring of 1995. Actually, I wonder, because if they made a new script in 1995, because we read the 1994 one, I'm wondering if, with the graphic novel being commissioned by Rossio, when it was commissioned, I'm guessing that they had received the latest version of the script. So I'm wondering if a lot of what was cut out that I left in may have been cut out in the final script. Instead of hiring a new director, TriStar instead hired writer Don McPherson, who at the time was working on a script for the movie Possession, to help with a new draft of the script. He accepted the job immediately due to being a big Godzilla fan. For TriStar, they were hoping that his script would bring the budget down. McPherson met with TriStar president Mark Platt to figure out a story. McPherson noted that the rising costs of the old draft was due to how often Godzilla was seen on screen, which would have been a digital visual effect. Okay, so that confirms that it would have been a digital Godzilla.
Could have got that budget down if they put a guy in a suit. All I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. McPherson met with the special effects crew to discuss what were the most expensive and difficult scenes. And they pointed out that because of Godzilla's massive size, like that was the key reason to why it was going to be so expensive. Another thing was that whenever Godzilla or Griffin had interacted with the water, so whenever they jump into the ocean or the river or anything like that, that's also really difficult to do via CGI. And then anytime that the kaijus were to interact with buildings, say like smash a building, that's another big CG effect as well.
This is not a funny or original point, I guess, but it just drives me crazy. Like, they figured out how to do all these things.
Yeah.
You build a miniature building.
Yeah.
You'd stick a guy in a suit in a tank.
Yeah.
We had the technology.
So with that in mind, McPherson promised that he could write a script that could bring the budget down to $80 million. McPherson was given all the concept art from DeBont's version, but he ignored them and, and he referred to Toho's Godzilla instead. Even though McPherson thought that Elliott and Rossio's script was terrific, he did point out a few issues. They ignored the Japanese element of post-war nuclear politics, making Godzilla a single country problem and not a global problem. This is a similar issue I have with the movie Don't Look Up, that it should not be a singular country trying to figure out a global catastrophe.
You're saying that there's problems with Don't Look Up? That's shocking.
So mad I Don't Look Up. A quote from McPherson: "They neglected the poetic aspect of fear and wonder from the original Toho movies, and the idea that a prior sin which had caused the mutation and revenge of Godzilla. There were also too many characters that didn't deliver in the end. So you may have noticed when you're following along, I excluded a lot of reoccurring characters in the synopsis because a lot of them did not contribute to the plot at all. And Godzilla isn't given much character development. It's treated more like a force of nature. There was also so much destruction in the first half of the script that by the time you get to the big battle at the end, you're fatigued by the destruction. And it's hard to identify with Godzilla or even any of the scientists trying to protect the world. Really, we just had no one to root for.
I feel like I agree with some of his notes, but not all of them. Like that last one in particular, I feel like the final battle was not harmed by the fact that we also saw a San Francisco attack at the beginning of the movie, especially because now we have two monsters fighting each other instead of just one force of nature.
Yeah. It's interesting, those notes about being the force of nature. Can't conceptualize it as a thing to be afraid of. Can't relate to the scientists either because there's too many of them. Those were all the things they were doing in the 2016 Shin Godzilla. Those were explicit, like in the goal of that film was they were reinventing Godzilla, not as the like protector superhero that he had been in the past films, but it just as a pure force of nature that just goes and destroys. It doesn't eat anything. It doesn't want anything. It just destroys. There's also like running gags about like these incompetent bureaucrats who are just like idiots. And there's dozens and dozens of them that you can't pick out a single one. That's very interesting.
I recently watched Shin Godzilla, which is, in my opinion, one of the most terrifying Godzillas that are out there. And you're right that it's just like, it cuts to Godzilla who is destroying Tokyo. He's in Tokyo, right? He's just...
I believe so.
No, he's on his way to Tokyo. That's what it was.
Yeah, he ends in Tokyo, yeah.
Yeah, that was the end goal for him, that he was going to arrive in Tokyo, much like Speed 2, like he's just kind of slowing down.
As he gets there, yeah.
As he gets there. I did have an issue where I'm just like, I don't know really who the main character is. Like, I don't really know who I'm supposed to identify with, because it cuts to Godzilla who's destroying the city, and then it goes to bureaucrats in a meeting, and it just kind of cuts back and forth to figure out, like, what do we do about this thing? And everyone, whatever decision they make is always the wrong decision, even though it seems like it should have been the right decision.
Yeah, I thought it was unconventional. I thought it paid off. I really liked it. I believe it was specifically intended to mirror the earthquake and subsequent nuclear plant failure that had happened in Japan a couple of years before that.
Oh.
It was in a way like a satire about the government response to that.
Another thing I'm thinking about with those notes, to kind of go back to the force of nature idea, and specifically also with the idea of nuclear testing being kind of what wakes up and almost creates Godzilla in a sense, or at least turns Godzilla into a threat to humanity. Does it seem like that theme can't coexist with Godzilla is a superhero who's defending us from aliens? It almost feels like those two ideas are against each other and they can't really exist in the same story.
Well, that's kind of why I like Godzilla as a franchise, is the fact that they've had, I think they crossed the 30 mark. They're over 30 movies now. You can have both those ideas at different points in the franchise. I mean, we're talking about Godzilla as force of nature or superhero. Neither of those are Godzilla in the first movie, which I think for a lot of people is how they think of Godzilla. He is a villain in that movie. Like,
yeah.
Godzilla is sometimes the nice superhero, gives you thumbs up, winks at the camera, and sometimes he's a nuclear aberration and a monster that will kill you.
It's just interesting to me that Don McPherson has these notes, especially those first main notes. It feels like you couldn't do that in the same story that ends with Godzilla beating up another monster and saving the day.
Yeah. Although I think that is what 2014 then did try to do. People don't like that movie. I think it achieved that relatively well.
So I'm going to kind of go over Don McPherson's script. I'm going to go through a faster synopsis of it. But it'll be interesting because, like, since we heard the first one, you'll hear a lot of the similar synopsis, but you'll see, like, where he'll fix up certain things in here, which is interesting, which is why I kept in a lot of it. But Don McPherson, he submitted his draft of Godzilla on May 31st, 1995. In this film, it takes place in 1999 and not 93-94. There is a prelude before the actual film. I don't know if they were going to show it or maybe it was just going to be text on the screen, but it says, an alien probe rises from the surface of Saturn on trajectory for Earth, striking and destroying an American deep space satellite in its path. June 10th, 1999, the Arctic. Junji, a young man, and his son, Hiro, are ice fishing when a red blood-like fluid begins seeping up through the ice and all around them. A fissure forms nearby, the crevice filling with a strange liquid. San Francisco, June 15th. Richard and Jill Llewellyn are brought to the Arctic base, leaving behind Tina in the care of Jill's sister. June 17th. The Arctic location is now an American scientific military outpost where Junji and Hiro are being detained. There, soldiers cart away drums of a mysterious red atomic fluid. Jill stays in the lab to study the red fluid, while Richard goes into the fissure to explore. The kaiju wakes up and escapes, leaving the outpost in ruins. Jill is knocked out and wakes up injured to NSC agent Pike, who informs her that she's the sole survivor. Footprints can be seen in the snow as they fly away. June 29th. The alien probe plunges into Lake Apopko in Utah. In San Francisco, at Richard's funeral, Aaron Vaught, Richard's former student and best-selling author on theories about dragons and dinosaurs, meets Jill. Aaron brings up the theory that what she experienced was not an earthquake, but a giant creature, and that other survivors are being held at a hospital where she was treated. Back at the lake, the probe is absorbing all the bats and making mutant or probe bats that stand 5 feet tall. Aaron and Jill sneak into Hawking post-trauma care unit to find Junji. Junji tells them all about Gojira, which Aaron knows as Godzilla, confirms that Gojira destroyed the base and shows them pictures of Godzilla battling Griffin. Pike interrupts them. Jill wants to know what's going on, but Pike admits that he doesn't even know what's going on yet. June 30th. Pike takes Jill, Aaron, and Junji back to the Arctic crevice to investigate. Aaron brings up that there must be an adversary. They discover a strange remnant of an ancient civilization with advanced biotechnology. There's a microscopic being that burrows into Junji's eyes, and the others rush him to the infirmary and is evacuated on a C-130 filled with canisters of the red fluid. Junji's bones are shifting underneath his skin. The mutant bats remove limbs and organs from nearby cattle and bring them to the alien probe. Survivalist Nelson Fleer notices the bats. July 1st. In the Pacific Ocean, 3 fishing boats are capsized by Godzilla's wake. The beast is headed to San Francisco, where Pike, Jill, and Aaron are stationed. A submarine is sent to destroy Godzilla, but fails. They suggest nuking the beast, but Aaron proposes that the red liquid might be a tranquilizer. They spray the surface of the water, and when Godzilla comes ashore, they spray it down its throat before it collapses on the Golden Gate Bridge. They airlift Godzilla to a holding tank in Massachusetts. The convoy passes over Traveler, Utah, where Fleer is about to get married to his girlfriend Rose, but is rudely interrupted by mutant bats, taking away many of the guests.
That is very rude of them.
Yeah. July 3rd. Godzilla is stored in a huge tank at Fort Tuscarora. Aaron wants to study Godzilla, but Jill wants to kill it. Even Tina is against Jill, saying Godzilla is a force of nature that should be respected. Jill sends Tina to Manhattan so her aunt can watch over her. Junji continues to mutate, and the microscopic being is speaking through Junji. They are warned of an invading alien species and a doomsday beast, and that Godzilla was created by an ancient biotech Earth civilization from dino DNA to protect the world from such threats.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Junji soon dies.
It's interesting that so often, because it's in Godzilla King of the Monsters, I believe, and it's definitely in like a handful of other American dubs of those early Godzilla movies, the idea that he is a mutated actual dinosaur. So Americans just like, they see a big lizard and they're like, audiences won't buy this unless we say he's a dinosaur.
Yeah.
We have to say it out loud in the movie.
He didn't mutate from an already existing lizard creature, but instead a creature that lived 65 million years ago.
Yeah.
Aaron hypothesizes that Godzilla is headed to Traveler, where a big fireball landed just a few days before. Jill and Aaron go to Utah, where they meet Fleer, who drives them to Lake Apopka. They all scuba dive and discover the cave and Griffin. Aaron lights a flare and wakes up the beast. The 3 escape from the lake and watch the Griffin emerge from the cave and fly out and destroys Aaron's Jeep with a blast of bioelectricity from its wings. So Aaron's Jeep is getting fucked no matter what.
Gotta blow up that Jeep.
This time they weren't driving it, though. He just kind of like came out and was like, fuck you, Fleer, and then took out the Jeep. Griffin destroys Traveler, killing civilians, including Rose. Filled with vengeance, Fleer joins Aaron and Jill, then they return to Fort Tuscarora. Godzilla awakens with a sense that Griffin is here. Nothing can stop Godzilla. Not the constant flow of red fluid, the holding tank, nor the artillery fire. Godzilla heads to the shore and dives into the water. July 4th. The two beasts are projected to meet in NYC. Manhattan is being evacuated. Jill takes a helicopter into the city to save her daughter. And her sister, I guess, it didn't actually mention that in the synopsis, but she doesn't get saved. Jill is dropped off in Central Park, 30 blocks away from Tina. The Griffin has arrived. A date clock on the United Nations building is damaged, and the inverted numbers read 666. The number of the beast.
Hell yeah. That's so stupid. I love it.
Yeah. Godzilla comes ashore and steps on a gang of looters, because sure.
Yeah.
Jill finds Tina as the Battle of the Beasts begins. Jill and Tina need to find a way off the island. Godzilla is losing the fight and is knocked unconscious. Aaron points out the restraining device on its neck, preventing Godzilla from fighting with its fire breath. Aaron and Fleer are flown in via helicopter to rig an explosive on Godzilla's neck while Apaches distract the Griffin. Pike is in one of the Apaches. He lures the Griffin to the Empire State Building, shoots through it, causing the top of the building to topple over and knock down the beast. Pike turns to Godzilla, hoping to kill it, but it's swiped down by Griffin before he could shoot. Jill and Tina crash a gasoline tanker near Griffin to distract it from getting it to Godzilla. The restrainer is removed. Fleer and Aaron rappel to a nearby rooftop. Godzilla gets up and begins fighting again. Griffin dives towards Godzilla, but is stopped with Godzilla's fire breath. Jill, Tina, Aaron, and Fleer all meet up on the ground and run into the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. They run into Pike, who they are not happy with. The Griffin crashes before them. They all run into a tunnel. Pike shoots at the winged beast and is eaten by one of the snake tongues again. The Griffin cracks its neck, similar to how Pike would crack his neck. This shows that Griffin is actually assimilating Pike, which was never clear before, but I thought that was interesting that anything that it consumes now has the ability of whatever it just consumed.
It's like the smoke monster on Lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Griffin is now aware that the red fluid can stop Godzilla and grabs the restraining device. Godzilla steps into the tunnel, causing it to flood. Godzilla tail slaps the device out of Griffin's claw. Jill, Tina, Aaron, and Fleer flee the flooding tunnel. The pilot of the helicopter that dropped Jill off in Central Park finds them and picks them up, although he was there to really rescue Pike instead. The battle continues in the East River. Godzilla fire breathes the surface of the water, making a cloud of steam to blind Griffin. Godzilla breaches on Liberty Island and sets off a compound of fireworks.
Wait. A compound of firework? What does that mean? It's like the fireworks factory is right there. Like,
So if you remember, I was spewing off a list of dates.
Oh, right. It's July 4th, huh?
And it's July 4th.
Yep.
And I thought maybe this has to do with Independence Day, but no, this is all coincidental.
Okay.
This was all leading up to the fact that they could just shoot fireworks in the middle of this fight. And this was, I guess, this is where they shoot off fireworks, is from Liberty Island. I don't know that as someone who has never lived in New York. So maybe, but yeah, he sets off all the fireworks that were supposed to go off that night.
Okay. Silly business.
Griffin spots Godzilla and attacks. Godzilla waits, bends over, and slices Griffin open with its dorsal fins. Godzilla rips Griffin in half, bites its head off, and sets the body on fire, and then places Griffin's head on the Statue of Liberty's torch, kind of like a head on a pike.
Ooh, I do like that, though.
Yeah.
That's cool. Gotta hand it to him there.
Yeah.
Jets move in to kill Godzilla, but Jill calls off the strike. Her reasoning is that Godzilla may be needed again. A missile is accidentally fired from a jet and hits a helicopter. Godzilla catches the chopper and places it on the top of the statue's crown. He gives off a mighty roar and disappears into the sea. So that's McPherson's script. which I actually like that. That's a much better story.
It's not bad. It doesn't seem like there's less water in it, though,
No.
which I feel like was one of the stated goals.
What he cut out as far as effects goes is the destruction of San Francisco. Yes,
Yeah.
Godzilla did take out the Golden Gate Bridge, but he didn't like rampage its way through the city like the one before. Instead, it was like, oh, he's going to breach here. We got to catch him before he causes any damage on land.
And if you need to cut a city destruction for budget reasons, you don't cut the New York one.
I think it's interesting that in both versions, the idea that humans are able to capture Godzilla right away.
Yeah.
It feels like that would be one of the things that Toho says you can't do in their master document. Because I feel like you're kind of undercutting him there a little bit.
Yeah. And to like airlift him is just baffling to me. Like, this is a huge beast, and you're using maybe 4 or 5 carrier helicopters to like move them across the country.
I just want to see a movie. The entire movie is them attempting to do that and just like dropping him every now and then and just like having to deal with the logistics of trying to fuel these helicopters enough to get it over.
It's like planes, trains, and automobiles. They're just different methods are falling through.
Yep. That's the road trip movie I want to see.
Yeah. Towards the end of 1995, Godzilla was still in development hell. Even after McPherson's rewrite, the budget was still too much. Rumors claim that the Sony Corporation was bringing in a new management team to run the studios. With that, executive Chris Lee thought that this would be an opportune moment to get Godzilla into production. And to lead the way, he hired his old friends Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich.
There they are.
The reason to bring Emmerich and Devlin on was because they had the ability to make cheap and visually stunning movies with a high return. Their film Universal Soldier was made for $23 million and earned $102 million. Stargate was made with $55 million and grossed over $197 million. And their up-and-coming alien invasion movie Independence Day, that was made for $75 million. And that film ended up making over $817 million in the box office.
Meanwhile, Toho has put out 3 Godzilla movies since the initial deal was signed.
Yeah. Putting their name on a Godzilla movie was a guaranteed moneymaker. Lee explained, trying to defend his decision, quote, "They can take an icon like Godzilla and keep the essence of what is best for what was popular and has become sort of cheesy over time and reinvent it. They stay tuned to the myths and reinvent it for current audiences." Well, maybe.
I don't know about that.
The problem Lee was facing now was actually getting them to agree to make the film, because they turned down the pitch multiple times. Roland Emmerich recalled while on the set of Independence Day, Lee visited them to ask after several failed attempts, and Emmerich said to Lee, "Why are you not doing this?" And then from Devlin, as a way to shut down the idea, he said, quote, "Both of us thought it was a dopey idea." They didn't seem like big fans of this. They didn't seem to really want to jump on the opportunity, and they're just like, I don't know.
Shocking that that movie was made by 2 people who did not like Godzilla.
Yeah. For Emmerich, his next film was going to be a disaster film called Ground Zero, inspired by one of his favorite movies, The Right Stuff, where a meteor was discovered to impact the Earth, and a group of heroes had to fly up to that meteor and destroy it before it landed.
Oh.
Turns out that movie was already developed
Twice.
And it was called Armageddon. And there was also Deep Impact. So
Now, I wish we lived in the world where we had 3 identical meteor movies coming out at the same time.
Yeah. Any ideas that they were coming up with just fell flat. And from Devlin, quote, "One day in Paris, I looked over and saw Roland sketching on his pad. They were Godzilla sketches. And I know when Roland starts sketching, he's got the fever."
And I guess Roland Emmerich did get to make his meteor movie, except make it a much, much, much bigger meteor.
The moon.
Yeah.
Moonfall, yes.
That movie's buck wild.
Emmerich finally came around to want to make the Godzilla movie, explaining, quote, "Godzilla was one of the last concepts from the 50s that has never been done in a modern form."
Racist ass statement. They've done it 3 times in this many years in Japan.
He goes on saying, the idea of the giant monster as in tarantula or the beast of 20,000 fathoms. Why not do them again? Big lizard eats big apple. I like it.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, because of New York, of course.
Yeah, because it's New York. From Devlin, quote, over the course of 1 year, I was asked to do Godzilla several times. Each time I said no, because this was the product of a certain time period, and the qualities it possessed belonged to that time. But finally I realized that the War of the Worlds was a product of its time, and yet we rethought and came up with Independence Day. This picture could retain a certain monster movie feel while featuring our own original elements.
Do you think if he had been able to see the Tom Cruise, Steven Spielberg War of the Worlds, that might have then again deconvinced him to be like, wait a minute, no, that point doesn't work.
Dean Devlin, the best way to describe him is that he is a stick in a bike spoke in human form. So Chris Lee had got his wish, but he did not have the authority to greenlight the production. Lee offered the duo a step deal where they would be paid to develop Godzilla one step at a time until the new studio head took over Sony Pictures and they would make the final call. They agreed to the deal that Emmerich wanted to make the film on his own terms. He wanted Godzilla to be, quote, a fast-moving animal out of nature. Devlin and Emmerich announced on May 2nd, 1996 that they were developing a Godzilla movie. Both news to the world and news to Kerry Woods and Robert Fried, who did not know that this deal was happening. This solidified that their Godzilla project was dead in the water. Even though Woods and Fried were credited, they did not have anything to do with the Emmerich Godzilla movie. Emmerich and Devlin needed to get familiar with Godzilla, and where better to start than the first film from 1954. They were both genuinely surprised by the serious tone and how smart they were by having many of their effect shots take place at night and in the rain. When they went on to watch the sequel films, they were much less interested, and they just became a monster versus monster film. Emmerich admitted that he found this aspect uninteresting and why he didn't like the script that came from Elliott, Rossio, and McPherson. Devlin and Emmerich did admit that they thought the previous drafts were genuinely good and, quote, even though we decided to abandon that script and take a completely different direction, but it did tell us that it could be done elegantly and you can do it straight. And when I say straight, I mean still with a lot of humor, but respectively. That quote was also from Dean Devlin. So this was going to be a page one rewrite. From a CNN interview, Emmerich stated, quote, I didn't want to make the original Godzilla. I wanted nothing to do with it. I wanted to make my own. We took part of the original movie's basic storyline in that the creature becomes created by radiation and becomes a big challenge. But that's all we took. Then we asked ourselves, what can we do today with a monster movie and a story like that? We forgot everything about the original Godzilla from there.
We can tell.
Oh boy. Both Devlin and Emmerich were warned by Jan de Bont that any changes that they made to Godzilla were going to be met with resistance from Toho. But they were very optimistic that Toho would like the direction that they were going in. And what was the first thing that they did? They changed how Godzilla looked. Emmerich explained that the original look didn't make sense to him, so he changed it. What he wanted was something that was more, quote, realistic, and used the latest visual effects to create it. To help design the monster, Emmerich and Devlin hired Patrick Tatopoulos.
Mr. Nico Papadopoulos? It's Tatopoulos. Whatever.
I did not know this originally about the Emmerich Godzilla, but the main character, Nick Tatopoulos, is named after the special effects designer for this film.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
He was also the production designer for them for Stargate and Independence Day. Tatopoulos was a big fan of Godzilla. It was one of the first films he saw as a kid, and it inspired him to get into the film industry.
Sorry, I laughed at that. Does not show in this concept drawing of Godzilla.
No.
This looks like it was drawn by someone who fucking hates Godzilla.
He saw the first designs for Godzilla from the original draft, and he did not like it. He thought they were just taking the original design and they were alternating it to make it, quote, just better. In an EON interview, he stated, quote, I think it's very disrespectful. It's more disrespectful for me to alter something existing than to take a fresh new direction. The direction that Emmerich gave to Totopoulos was that he wanted a creature that could run 500 miles per hour through the streets of New York. There was no way to make Godzilla do that with the old design. Emmerich did claim that he faxed to Totopoulos Toho's list of rules, but Totopoulos says that he never got them. I suspect that Emmerich took the list and he just immediately threw it away. He drew dozens of designs, trying his best not to make Godzilla look like a dinosaur, because that is something that we've seen in Jurassic Park, and a dinosaur rampaging through a city has already been made, and that's the Lost World Jurassic Park. So something that he gave Godzilla was a predominant chin, which is actually inspired by Shere Khan, the tiger in the Jungle Book.
Okay, I could see that.
Totopoulos is quoted saying, "He had a great chin thing, and I always loved it. He looked scary, evil, but you respected him."
I look at this picture on Wikipedia. I don't know if you've seen the same one. It was by Totopoulos, shown to Emmerich and Devlin at Cannes, and Godzilla's kind of doing like a sexy pose.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
where he's
yeah.
kind of like leaned over in a weird
Like
way.
he's doing the pose that women in comic books do often, where like he's showing his thigh and his bust, but he's also got an arm covering where like nipples might be if he was a mammal. Kind of got his head to the side to create a nice profile. It's a strange pose to see Godzilla in.
I mean, he's got to show off the features.
I suppose, yeah.
In May 1996, Devlin and Emmerich were starting to lose interest in making the movie and were concerned with whatever they came up was going to be shut down by Toho. So why even bother? Totopoulos had to meet with them at the Cannes Film Festival, this is what you were mentioning before, while they were promoting Independence Day to convince them to keep going with the film. He showed them two of his best illustrations, which is the sexy Godzilla, and when Emmerich looked at them, he said, "That's it. That's our next picture."
I just needed to see a picture of Godzilla that made me want to fuck him, and then I'll
Yeah.
make that movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Now I'm into this.
So the next step was to present it to Toho for their approval. Totopoulos added color to Godzilla's concept art and made a 2-foot-tall maquette to present to them. Executives and producers at Sony were conflicted with the design. Some of them stated that Toho will never accept this, and some went as far as saying that they ruined Godzilla. But do you know who loved it? Chris Lee. Chris Lee loved the new Godzilla, because, of course, he's going to love everything that Devlin and Emmerich make.
Yeah.
Sony advised them to reveal the newly designed beast in stages, show them the head, then the body, give thorough explanations as to why they decided to change different parts of Godzilla. And Devlin was like, "Fuck that. It's either this design or nothing. We are not wanting to deceive Toho."
Okay.
Regardless of the pushback, Sony couldn't argue with the success of Independence Day and kept Devlin and Emmerich on to make Godzilla. September 1996, Totopoulos and Emmerich flew to Tokyo to pitch their movie to Toho. Devlin, who usually handles pitches, could not make it because he was hospitalized in Germany with a stomach ailment. I have my suspicion that if Devlin pitched this movie to Toho, it would not have gotten made.
Yeah. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. Emmerich was nervous and embarrassed. Right outside of Toho Studios was a statue of Godzilla with a sign around its neck that read, "Mr. Emmerich, I'm ready for your shooting call." They had met with many of the studio executives, including Toho chairman Asao Matsuka, Godzilla's series producer Shogo Tomiyama, and effects director Koshi Kawakita. Roland Emmerich was so used to getting his way with his success, but this was different. So much was riding on this pitch, and he had to get it right. Totopoulos was so excited to reveal the new Godzilla, but after uncovering the maquette and the concept art, it was met with silence. Some of the executives audibly gasped at the new Godzilla. Totopoulos was uneasy, and Emmerich didn't know what to do. They asked if they could come back the next day. Emmerich was certain that they had lost the movie. Tomiyama that night visited Tanaka. If you remember the producer Tanaka, he produced the very first and came up with a pitch for Godzilla. Mm-hmm. Now, because of his health, he was unable to attend the meeting, so he was actually updated by Tomiyama. Tomiyama couldn't actually bring any of the artwork with him from the studio, so he actually had to describe it the best that he could, which is, I think this is the reason why.
Yeah.
And somehow that was enough for Tanaka to approve the film.
Oof.
Yeah.
Big mistake.
Tanaka would unfortunately pass away in April of 1997. This was soon after the filming of the Emmerich Godzilla had just begun. The next day, the head of Toho, Isao Matsuka, approved the film saying, quote, "We feel you've kept the spirit of Godzilla. The sense of the character is still there. When we look at him, it's Godzilla and nothing else. So we're giving you the green light." Yeah.
Okay.
In interviews promoting Godzilla, Devlin would claim that Toho preferred the new Godzilla, which we now know is a bold-faced lie. From the perspective of Toho, a lot of the movies that they had made in the past years, they had not distributed them outside of Asia. So this movie would then reestablish the brand internationally, and Toho would make millions by simply approving the picture. Even if fans disapprove, this would encourage demand for more Toho Godzilla films. They'll win no matter what.
Yeah.
Even if it's terrible. Toho did request some design changes to make the creature somewhat consistent. There had to be 3 rows of dorsal fins and 4 toes and fingers, which Totopoulos changed right away. Now that they had the approval, they had to write the screenplay. Now, Emmerich and Devlin needed to convince TriStar to make the movie because they didn't get the green light from Sony yet. They only got the green light from Toho.
That's so funny that they wound up being in that order.
So they made an agreement that they would write the screenplay on spec, and if TriStar didn't approve the script, duties would be handed back to TriStar. 5.5 weeks later, they wrote their first draft. They did take some elements from the Elliott and Rossio draft and inserted it into their story, the first being having it set in New York City, although it would take place mostly entirely in New York City. There was a moment in an early draft stating that Godzilla was an alien that was planted on Earth, but that was soon backtracked and thought Godzilla needed to be the result of a nuclear test. It was important that Godzilla embody the fear of nuclear weaponry.
There is a Space Godzilla in the Toho series, but that's a separate character.
Yes. Doesn't Space Godzilla turn into Mechagodzilla, or am I thinking of something else?
Yes and no. Yeah. Mechagodzilla is sometimes translated as Space Godzilla, bizarrely.
Ah, that's why.
He's a clone, he's from space, parts of him get used. It's complicated.
Yeah.
Okay.
As far as addressing the morals that seem to be lacking, the nuclear test simply worked as an explanation as to why this creature exists, but after that, it's just an animal trapped in an urban island trying to survive. I also find it suspect that the nuclear testing takes place in France, and it isn't a result of US nuclear testing.
Yeah.
America's just got to find a way to cover its own ass.
Yeah. And then from the revisions and even seeing the movie, this feels more like a remake of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and not a Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
With that mentality that it is an animal and not just an unstoppable behemoth, this Godzilla would be vulnerable to missiles and rockets and would have to use its abilities to avoid getting hit.
Damn. That is a negative impact. I repeat, that is a negative impact. Negative impact, sir.
Negative impact.
It would need to be fast. It would need to find places to hide, which would include subway tunnels, which I guess it's small enough to fit into. The size of Godzilla was not really consistent.
Yeah.
There was a proposal to give it chameleon skin that would give it the ability to change colors and blend in with its environment, but that was abandoned.
Okay. Do they just mean in the water? Because that's not gonna fly in New York, obviously, right?
Yeah. I imagine that might have been just like a special effects nightmare to deal with and be like, hey, can we have him change his skin? He's like, we're already dealing with a giant monster with a big chin, and you want it to change colors now?
But also, how would that help it hide if an enormous thing just happens to be colored the same as the building behind it? I feel like it would still be pretty stinking easy to spot.
Let's say they're going crazy sci-fi. Let's say this chameleon ability is so advanced that it's like he's like the car in Die Another Day. It's like it can just turn invisible.
Yeah.
people would bump into him. Like, they'd still know he was there.
Yeah, I don't understand. I mean, I'm glad they kind of abandoned it, but it would be a really interesting feature to see, to be like Godzilla turns invisible somehow, but his rampaging footsteps can still be visible.
Yeah.
Another abandoned feature, which is probably its trademark move, is its atomic breath, because they felt it was unnatural. Instead, it got, quote, power
I
breath,
hate them. I hate them so much.
where when it exhaled, it would be the equivalent of a strong gust of wind. Another altered element was Godzilla laying hundreds of eggs and implying that it was asexual.
He's pregnant.
He is?
He. A very unusual he.
Although Godzilla has been viewed as male in the past because all the stunt men inside the suits were male, the creature is not estranged from raising a child. But this was on a whole nother level. If all the hatchlings lived, the planet would have to deal with this invasive species and not a nuclear threat like the original films.
Yeah.
Over at Sony, Chairman Mark Canton was fired and John Cayley took over as president and COO of Sony Pictures Entertainment in November 1996. He was gunning for a franchise, and that was his number one mission when he joined Sony, and he thought Godzilla would be that franchise.
Guess again, idiot.
The franchise that he did pursue was 007.
Okay.
Because he had recently worked on GoldenEye. But after a lawsuit with MGM, they agreed to give 007 to MGM, and in return, they got a little-known web-slinging superhero named Spider-Man.
Oh, wow.
Hey, that deal worked out for them.
Yeah.
So after reading the script and seeing the potential for merchandise, theme park rides, cartoons, and an international market, Canteen greenlit the movie. Not only that, but Centropolis, which is Emmerich and Devlin's production company, they were set to make 2 sequels, and they had options for non-Godzilla movies, anything that they wanted to come up with. Now, if you remember, the big selling point of Emmerich and Devlin is that they could deliver a big blockbuster movie for cheap. Sony had assumed that after their draft that eliminated Griffin and tightened the location, the budget would be significantly cheaper. At first, they projected the film would cost $65 million. Independence Day, by comparison, was $70 million. With the amount of mechanical and CGI effects needed to make the movie, the project budget was spiraling out of control and is now estimated to cost $100 million to make. Totopoulos had made suits and animatronics of Godzilla and Godzilla babies, parts of Godzilla, and a full Godzilla suit, which was worn by stuntman Kirk Carley. Which I heard in a story that Kirk Carley, he had met with, who's the original stunt actor in the Godzilla suit?
Nakajima is his family name.
I guess the two of them had met at a convention and Kirk Carley was just fangirling over him and was explaining that he was also in a Godzilla suit, but he was simply there for a job. He was just in complete admiration for the original stunt actor.
He did incredible work in his movies and really took a physical toll on his body.
Yeah.
You'll hear horror stories from those productions.
And we talked about it, he could only stay in the suits for 3 minutes at a time before
Did you talk about him bringing out the full teacups of sweat from the suit?
Yeah. Oh. So many of the shots that were planned to use the suits and animatronics, they ended up using just maybe 24 shots with those animatronics. I know one that's pretty obvious is when the taxi cab is in Godzilla's mouth. That is an actual animatronic of Godzilla's head that they used for that. As far as the CG shots, that ramped up to about 400 shots for the entire film. The reason behind many of these decisions is because the suit and animatronics just couldn't move like a real animal. And in the computer, you have more control over that.
It's almost like the Toho Godzilla was designed with that in mind.
Yeah. Without initially telling the filmmakers, Sony Pictures decided the release date should be Memorial Day, or May 20th, 1998, the Wednesday before Memorial Day. They wanted to go ahead of any other studio to claim that date, because other major blockbusters premiered that weekend, like Star Wars: A New Hope, Mission Impossible, and The Lost World: Jurassic Park. This caused the filming to be rushed. When it came to marketing the movie, Emmerich and Devlin were adamant that Sony could not use a full body image or a head of Godzilla for trailers or promotional materials. Devlin complained about how trailers give away the whole plot, which is something that we still deal with today, and not seeing the monster would incentivize audiences to come to the theater to finally see the monster. Devlin may have been referencing Mission Impossible because in their trailer, they actually give away the ending of the movie.
Yeah.
I did not know that. I actually rewatched the trailer for Mission Impossible and holy, they do. Like they give away the twist ending in the trailer and I never realized
That's
it.
crazy.
They knew we were coming. That was a decoy.
The problem with not giving up the image of Godzilla is that there won't be any time to create merchandise ahead of time to sell once the movie hits theaters. Emmerich and Devlin finally caved and gave up the image. Almost 300 companies signed an NDA saying that they would not reveal what the creature looked like until the movie premiered. Taco Bell actually paid Sony $60 million so that they could incorporate Godzilla in a Taco Bell commercial. You may have remembered this commercial.
Famous, yeah.
I think I need a bigger box.
Frankly, best thing to come out of this whole affair.
When they did make a trailer, it cost them an additional $600,000 to make a standalone scene that takes place in the Natural History Museum, the scene that never appears in the movie.
Oh, wow. I had completely forgotten that. That you just took me back to like watching TV in 1997.
This creature was believed to be one of the largest predators who ever lived on our planet.
The whole point of it, they were trying to show that Godzilla is not only bigger than the Tyrannosaurus Rex, but like significantly bigger.
Yeah.
Like Godzilla's foot alone is as big as a Tyrannosaurus Rex. There was the dick analogy slogan that they were throwing around saying size does matter.
Yep.
Huge part of movie taglines at the time. And Star Wars did it too.
Along with that, they had billboards that were promoting how big Godzilla actually is. They would put it on buses or something, be like, the actual Godzilla would be like 5 buses lined up in a row. That's how long Godzilla is, or stuff like that. And that was like a big promotion for it. Or like they would have like billboards to be like, if Godzilla were here, it'd be like 5 billboards stacked on top of each other. That's how tall he is, or something like that.
Yeah.
The trailer that they made played before another successful Sony film, Men in Black, nearly a year before Godzilla would premiere. The trailer was so popular that theaters started advertising that they were playing the trailer rather than the movie that played after.
Wow.
Perception started to change once rumors came out stating that Godzilla would be nothing like Godzilla that we know and love. And it didn't help that Dean Devlin told CNN, quote, physically, it's totally different. And when you look at our Godzilla, you won't feel any nostalgia.
Correct. Accurate.
That is definitely not something anybody would want to brag about, especially in today's media climate.
Again, Dean Devlin should have pitched the movie to Toho.
He's going to solve the whole thing for us.
Yeah. When the fans found out that Godzilla would not have its signature atomic breath, they were furious, and the studio was receiving countless angry phone calls, letters, and even emails. So Sony had Emmerich change 2 shots in the film. When Godzilla uses his power breath, something in his breath is flammable, and when it hits an open flame, it'll ignite. But when a leak of Godzilla's full body came out online in late 1997, that's when fans really lost it. At first, they denied it, saying that it was a decoy illustration, but eventually they had to own up to it because it was actually the real image of Godzilla. And again, Dean Devlin had to do some damage control. From him, quoted saying, "I think that when the real fans see this movie, they're going to realize that, yes, this is not like the sequels, but it's very much in the spirit of the first Godzilla movie."
Okay.
It is probably more true to the original vision of the first movie than the other 21 sequels. In essence, we feel that it is more respectful to have a new creature than to mess with the old one.
We're better at making this Japanese character than the Japanese filmmakers are.
Yeah. Just cartoon version of like the height of American arrogance.
Yeah.
Yup. The fans being upset at this gives me a real Ugly Sonic vibe.
Well, I was just thinking of that, yeah.
I guess we should be happy that when whoever produced Sonic saw that reaction, they did not go, look, we're actually being more true to the Sonic character than any other game since the first original one.
I mean, good on Dean Devlin for like doubling down, but this is not the hill to die on.
Yeah, I mean, he's consistent, I guess. I'll give him that.
Yeah. Something that was mentioned before that I think we need to clarify. The film takes place primarily at night and during the rain. Part of it was to pay homage to the 1954 film, which is misleading because even though the main attack happens at night, only one scene in Gojira actually takes place in the rain, and that's kind of the quote-unquote hurricane scene.
Where Nakajima almost died in the suit because they were just shooting bottle rockets at him.
Oh, God. But another part of this was that the reason for having it at night and for the rain is to hide a lot of the special effects.
Yeah.
Now, it's easier to hide the monster's flaws if it's dark, and rain is partially blocking your view. What they did not take into consideration is that the VFX had to add an extra layer of rain on every shot of Godzilla, which increased the budget and added to the render time.
Oh, yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
That's why you use fog, not rain. Fog is cheaper.
With the cost of the picture rising, the amount of money being poured into marketing, the budget of this film was closer to about $150 million. And according to the Wall Street Journal, Godzilla would need to make $240 million in order for it to be successful.
So it was right back up to where the original budget that they said no to was.
Exactly. In fact, it is $30 million over the original budget that they denied. In an unprecedented move, Sony was demanding theaters to give them 80% of ticket sale prices for the first week, 75% for the next 2 weeks, and then 70% from then on. Typically, theaters would give about 60 to 70% of the profits back to the studios for the first week, but the demand was so high that theaters had no choice but to pay the added cost. Godzilla was set to play in more screens than the Lost World Jurassic Park, and they had already paid Toho $5 million to keep the rights to make a sequel. The hype was big. There was just one small problem.
The movie wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Oh.
The VFX weren't finished. And in the final weeks before the film was released, the digital effects team, they were working around the clock, basically doing 24-hour shifts just to get the movie out on time. Which means that no one could properly screen the movie before it was released. And the first time anyone would see it, including the studio executives, would have to see it in theaters with everyone else. Remember, the release date is May 20th. At last, the film was completed just hours before the premiere on May 18th. Richard Pusateri, a reporter in LA and a Godzilla fan, called the film a gyno, which is Godzilla in name only. The executives were disappointed in the film. Their notes to improve the film fell to the wayside. On its opening weekend, it earned just over $55 million, and by the end of the week, it barely scratched $75 million. And the next week, they saw a significant drop by making only $18 million. Soon, audiences and critics were turning on the film. It was a failure. John Fraser, who was hired to create the mechanical and practical effects for DeBont's Godzilla, said, quote, Sony rejected Jan's budget. Then a few years later, they made a movie with Emmerich for $10 million more, and it was terrible. There were many criticisms, like the acting was poor, the size of Godzilla was inconsistent, the humor was forced, but it all came down to was that they did not stay faithful to the original material. And that is what was most important. What was projected to be the #1 film in 1998 turned out to be the 9th, falling behind other films like The Waterboy and Deep Impact.
It is.
Total, it made about $130 million during its theatrical run. When it premiered in Japan weeks later, it only made about $33 million, and many upset fans. Emmerich would blame the marketing for the movie's failure.
It sounds like the marketing might have been the only success of that movie. At least they were trying to do something memorable.
Yeah. But as a reminder to Roland Emmerich, there are many factors to blame when it comes to a failed movie, and the director is probably one of them. Dean Devlin, again, coming in for damage control, he said, "Our movie did what it was supposed to do, and we're happy about it. And if you don't like it, to hell with you." On December 14th, 1998, Toho announced that they will be starting production for a new Godzilla movie, Godzilla Millennium, eventually known as Godzilla 2000, which would kick off the Millennium era of Godzilla. Rumors stated that Toho took the rights away from TriStar, but it was in their contract that they were allowed to still make Godzilla movies while TriStar was doing their own thing. This is actually a similar contract that they have with Legendary and Warner Brothers right now. So this is why you're getting movies from Toho and Legendary at the same time. Godzilla, the series, an animated show that tied into the film, premiered on Fox on September 12th, 1998. And it was actually well received. The show follows the life of the remaining Godzilla baby that sees Nick Totopoulos as a father figure. It fights other monsters, and it has atomic breath. There was talk about a Godzilla sequel, because overall the film did make nearly $380 million with the addition of the international box office. Emmerich and Devlin hired writer-director Tab Murphy, who had written Tarzan and The Hunter of Notre Dame, to write a treatment. In that, similar to the TV show, the baby Godzilla is raised by Totopoulos, they discover Monster Island, and Godzilla 2 is tasked to fight another threatening kaiju, a giant moth creature called Queen Bitch.
Excuse me?
Yes, I did not believe it at first.
A giant moth called... Oh my gosh.
America does have a long history of not wanting to use the name Mothra. they just called Mothra the Thing in her first translation.
But Queen Bitch, that is... Oh my god.
I would like it if Mothra wanted to call herself that. I would think that was cool. But I don't know about this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Monster Island is also a huge part of existing Godzilla, where I will say that
Yes,
we can't
yes.
blame that on them. Monster Island's real,
Yes.
and it's great.
So Devlin claims that Sony thought the budget was just way too high, but in truth, Sony was just not interested in making another Godzilla movie. A reboot was considered, but they did not follow through with it. Sony would end up buying the rights to distribute the Toho Godzilla 2000 in the US, and Sony just let the rights to Godzilla expire on May 20th, 2003. I do remember this afterwards, like after the Roland Emmerich movie. I was like, oh, there's a new Godzilla movie, but why doesn't that Godzilla look like the Roland Emmerich Godzilla? And it was being advertised just like it was the Roland Emmerich Godzilla. So
Yeah.
I was confused by that, like at the time, given I am 10 years old, so I don't know how the movie industry works, but I thought it was strange that this movie had come out like a few years later and they weren't related at all.
Yeah.
And as a final fuck you, producer Shogo Tomoyama at Toho realized in 2004 that they had the rights to use the TriStar version of Godzilla after director Ryuhei Kitamura asked if he could use it in his film Godzilla Final Wars. In the film, we could see the Totopoulos Godzilla, now known as Zilla, face off with the OG Godzilla, and he gets annihilated.
It's so good.
That's amazing.
He uses atomic breath on him, and then that is pretty much the end of it.
Yeah.
Final Wars premiered on July 29th, 2004, celebrating the 50th anniversary of Godzilla. And as part of the celebration, Godzilla would receive its star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
And Final Wars is excellent. I highly recommend that to everyone. It's a sloppy mess, but in a good way.
That's how we ended up with Godzilla in the US in the late 90s.
Godzilla-sized podcast episode.
Yeah.
It's a bigger beast.
Yeah, there's a lot here. Wow. We've talked about a lot of things on this show that I was not really aware of. I got really interested in Godzilla in a way that I'd never been before while going through this story.
Check them out.
Diet Coke, for somebody who's only seen the 1954 Godzilla, what should I watch?
I think the 80s might be the next place to go, honestly. I really like the later 60s and 70s ones, but let's face it, they're extremely silly.
Yeah.
If you're looking for something kind of more in the vein, the Return of Godzilla from 84 is really fucking excellent.
Okay.
As is Godzilla vs. Biollante, which I think was the next one right after that. There was a run in the 80s where Toho was kind of doing the thing that Roland Emmerich said he was doing and just kind of going back to basic and making like good, strong Godzilla movies. And they really, really work out.
Okay.
I would also suggest Final Wars. It's such a chaotic film that it doesn't matter if you watch it now or after you've seen all the Godzillas. It's so much fun. Those are my big 3 recommendations.
Okay.
And then Shin Godzilla.
I think just because of ease of access, the Criterion Collection has the first era of Godzillas all on HBO Max. That's something that I've been going through. Oh, was it Destroy All Monsters? I think it was.
Destroy All Monsters is very good as well. It was the first time they did a Godzilla movie where they were like, we're going to put all the monsters in this one.
Yeah. And it's fantastic just to see everyone fight against each other.
All right. I'm excited to check some of this out. Diet Coke, thank you so much for being on this episode with us.
Thank you for having me. This was a great time.
If people want to find more of what you got going on, where's the best place they can find all of that?
Just follow me on Twitter at VeryCoolEmily. Any link to anything I do is going to be there. I do another podcast called Diet Coke and Lilith's House of Snacks. It's on the Noise Space Network. Noisespace.xyz is where you can find that. It's a snack review podcast, and it's a lot of fun, and I hope everybody checks it out.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I think you recently finished, what was it, the 10 and 10 and 10?
Yeah, recently wrapped up podcast. That's on the Benview Network. That's where we did the David Wayne movie, The 10, which was ill-remembered, I would say, by the fact that it's not legally available anywhere currently, except for like buying the DVD used.
Yeah, I don't think I had heard about it until I saw you posting about it.
Yeah, it's a movie about the 10 commandments where each commandment gets its own little vignette, and we did an episode about each vignette, and each episode is exactly 10 minutes long. It's a really fun show. I'm really proud of it. Check that out as well.
All right.
And if you want to find more episodes of this podcast, you can go check out our website, pipedreampodcasts.com, which is also the home of Come On Fahuqua Pods, a Homestar Runner podcast, which Diet Coke was a guest on like a year ago now. I don't even remember which episodes those were now.
Time.
We also have Mystery Shack Look Back, which is the Gravity Falls rewatch podcast that is wrapping up right now, as well as Escape from Vault Disney. While you're there, you can also find links to all of our social media pages. We've got our email address as well, which is notgetmade@gmail.com. Send us any of your suggestions for future projects. I think this was one of our suggestions that we went off of.
Yes, this episode was suggested by Daniel, not me, Daniel. Their email is DinoDan95, which sounds like it was a fake email from me, but I assure you this was someone else.
As well as with any corrections of mistakes we might have made through this research. And then while you're there, you can also find our Patreon page, and we are so thankful for everyone who donates to us on Patreon and is helping to get our VeggieTales podcast made, which is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
We've got the first episode on our Patreon page, Pod Made You Special. That's going to go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening.
Thank you.